Hello and welcome. I'm Sam Califer, your host for Vision, the show where we talk all about the College of Arts and Sciences as well as its faculty and students. Today I'm joined by Jacob Tschume, a mathematics instructor in the departments of mathematics and statistics. He uses his background to collect data on topics like sports and COVID information. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yes, I'm glad to have you on, excited to talk about all of your work. But first, I was hoping you could just introduce yourself, talk about your professional experience, and how you came to Mississippi State.
Sure. I'm actually a longtime person of Mississippi State. I've been here, I got my master's degree here. I got here in 2010 and finished my master's in the spring of 2012. Was very nicely hired upon graduation while I was looking for jobs. Hired as a lecturer to start off and got my feet wet in the program. And then got promoted to instructor a few years later, and then I've been here ever since. So I've been here for going on 11, 12 years now. That's great.
I'm glad you got your degree here and could stick around and contribute, and that's so great. And that's why I wanted to have you on. I find your work is so interesting to me because of the way that you apply mathematics to in interesting ways and to real world situations. Mm-hmm. So for example, sports are a huge part of people's lives right now, especially in the middle of college football. Mm-hmm. And you are on the stats crew for several MSU teams, including the football team, the volleyball team, and the men's and women's basketball team. Mm-hmm. So I was hoping you could talk about, what is a stat crew and what kind of work are you doing?
Sure, yeah. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I got asked by a former colleague of mine if I was interested in maybe doing stats for one of the sports teams. And I'm like, sure. I said, it sounds interesting. I like sports in my life. So I started with men's basketball and I thought that was interesting. We just kind of compile all the stats and such for the team, report things to the SEC, the NCAA, all that good stuff. After doing that for a few years, I got the opportunity to join women's basketball. During our good runs back when Vic Schaefer was the coach. So that was a lot of fun watching that progress because I'm a big sports fan. Not only do I get to watch the sports, I also get to do something I do for a living, which is math and stats. So that's always good. More recently, in the last year or two, I've picked up football and volleyball. So for all four, I'm at every game. You can see me on the sidelines for some of them. Some of them I'm in the press box like in football, so you won't see me on TV, unfortunately. But I love compiling the numbers. I love seeing how the numbers tell the story of the game. Like you can tell by the end of the game what pointed out. What was the reasoning behind we won or we lost? And we report everything to NCAA, SEC, so that way it can keep it up for the history books. That way we can pull back records later on in our lives.
That's great. Yeah, it's so cool that you get to bring your background to something that you love. And that's something that I'm really interested in. You said help tell the story of a game. Mm-hmm. And I know when I watch sports, if the numbers appear on the screen or I've got someone there who's really helping to contextualize it, mm-hmm. it means so much more. Could you talk about that more? Why do they have you collecting these numbers and how does it enhance the sports watching experience?
Sure. So I guess for the record books, I'll start with that, is that when we compile these stats, while it may not be, sometimes we track, do we break a single game record? Throughout history books, for example, if somebody has the most passing yards in a game in football, we want to keep our stats very accurate. That way we know if a record's being broken. When that record's broken, it gets put into the history books, and down the line, you want to make sure everything is very accurate. That way, like I said, if somebody else breaks that or somebody's coming close, we have all of that. Another popular thing besides just game stats is career stats. If you don't keep accurate data for every game, then someone's career stats are messed up. So we want to make sure that their career is correctly highlighted upon graduation and moving on to the real world in that case.
Sure, yeah. That's so interesting, and I see it's such a history in every sport. Mm-hmm. You can watch the documentaries, and there's these great players from so long ago, mm-hmm. and we only know because the numbers were kept. Mm-hmm. So that's so great. And maybe you could talk about what is the actual math you're doing there? You compile them? Do you graph them out? What is the mathematical process like?
So thankfully, we don't have to do it all by hand anymore. I'm sure back long, 20, 30 years ago, they kept everything by hand and had to manually calculate this. We now use a system called Genius. We used to use a system called Stat Crew. And what we literally do is and depending on the sport, there's usually 2 or 3 of us who work games, one person watching, one person working the computer, one person manually writing it down as backup in this case. And then we let the computer kind of compile the stats for us. So we kind of get that idea away, but we still have to know what those numbers mean, because when a certain action happens in basketball or in football or in volleyball, for example, in volleyball, working a game the other day, the difference between a reception and a dig. We got to make sure we accurately keep that in, or you're going to mess up all the stats in the end. So you have to know part of the game, but then you also have to be able to compile it in the computer for you.
Sure, yeah, and that is, it really does require some knowledge in both those areas. So a very specific type of person to do that work, but it is so interesting. You know, I feel like people sometimes wonder, you know, the different ways that you can use math in your real life, and I think sports is a topic that really makes math so approachable to a lot of people. So that is also fascinating. And another kind of relevant area that you apply this work to is COVID information. I understand that you compile and graph this data for the public. So I was wondering, you know, what led you to start doing this, and what is that process like?
Sure. So just like everybody in the world, back in March of 2020 when the time changed, it was a little worrisome at that point. So after some time and getting through the initial shock of what the world was going through at that time, Mississippi went under a shelter-in-place order. I believe it was in April of 2020. So we were all asked to stay home unless we had to go to the grocery store. We didn't come to the university or anything. And I decided that the Mississippi Department of Health does a good job of reporting the numbers and projecting what's going on across the state. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper. So during that time when I wasn't doing my classes online, I was working in my Excel file on my computer, just compiling the numbers. And I figured, okay, we didn't know at the time this was going to be a short thing, or now we're approaching almost 2 years at this point. So I'm kind of glad that I decided to do that. So now I've kept all this data for the last 2 years almost, and now I'm able to track case numbers, death numbers, hospitalizations. Even more specifically, I'm focusing on vaccination numbers now, which is a new thing more recently. Testing numbers, because one of the things we always track are what's the positive percentage across the state. And then I've even dove a little deeper into now focusing on Oktibbeha County, where we have the university, and obviously this is where Mississippi State's located at. So I wanted to give the people on my social media a more accurate representation of what's happened locally along with statewide as well.
Great. And yes, I think that that's important work. I think it helps to get the word out there and make it where people can understand it. And one comment that really stood out to me is someone said, you know, under these posts, they said that it helps to make the numbers meaningful, which really just stood out to me. I think it's a good way to summarize all of this. So, you know, what do you hope that people take away from this work that you're doing?
So when I first started doing this, I'm one of the rare ones in my family that I have a mathematical mind, and I think that way, and all of it makes sense the first time I see stuff a lot of the time. A lot of my family's not that way. So I wanted a way to project not only to my family and friends, but anybody who come across my social media outcast, what the numbers actually meant. When someone says we're doing a 7-day average on cases, what does that actually mean? And I try to keep it relative to just Mississippi, because I don't have the time, and I'm not an expert on the rest of the country and how they're dealing with things as well, but I'm a little bit more familiar with what the state of Mississippi is working on right now. So I like to present the numbers in a very simple way, a nice simple graph, and I kind of relate it to the last time I post. So I post about once a week on my Twitter account, and I try to relate it to last week we were at this point, this week we're at this point, and then you can kind of tell that we are improving, or earlier on we were not improving. So we can make those generalizations in this case. I try not to dive too specific into certain aspects, because obviously I'm not an MD, I'm not an epidemiologist or anything like that. I keep it to just what the numbers say. I don't make any assumptions about them. People can draw their own conclusions about certain things. Some things are more obvious than others, but I try to keep it as simple as possible for the general public.
Great. And yes, I know for me, I'm not a math person, so seeing the graph really does help. And it's easier to draw those conclusions and make the numbers and statistics more meaningful. And you keep them over a long period of time, so you can really see how it changes every week. So that is just so fascinating to me, because it is so real world. You know, sometimes people think that math is abstract, but I like how it's, you know, being applied to something that is so relevant to everyone right now. So that's great. I'm glad we've gotten to talk about that. And so just to end, you know, you're applying all of this math to important topics. You know, what are some other ways that people can use math, or maybe, you know, surprising career paths that someone could use an expertise in mathematics and statistics?
Yeah, sure. So we have our traditional routes, usually in mathematics, that most people, I'm not saying you can't just get a bachelor's in mathematics. A lot of people go on to graduate work, either a master's or a PhD. The obvious routes are like academia, which is what I do. I'm more of a teaching faculty. We have research faculty who research all different varieties of mathematics, things that people never thought would be actually mathematics. Some things that are becoming more popular, actuarial sciences is becoming very popular. I'm one of the undergraduate advisors in our department as well, and a lot of my students have moved on to doing this field, which is pretty much risk management. So you take all the numbers and you take the probabilities, so it's slightly some statistics and some mathematics, and you calculate the risk that a company's willing to give towards a certain field. For example, insurance. If you're going to buy life insurance, they're going to run a model on you as a probable person who's going to buy it, and how much do they want to charge you a month? Are we going to charge you a lot because your risk is higher, or are we going to charge you lower because your risk is not? Healthcare insurance, which is now coming the forefront in COVID times nowadays, is that a lot of actuarial scientists help the models of how much you're going to be charged health insurance for private companies. A more popular one, a program we're about to start here at Mississippi State, is a data science program, which is kind of a little bit different, where you go into companies and you take all this big data and you compile it all and you figure out how can you optimize that company? How can they run better? Are they missing something that, for example, everybody in that department or company is not mathematically inclined? Have a data scientist come in, compile these numbers, project, hey, you should do X, Y, and Z, and you will optimize your production and make more money or achieve your goals a little bit better there. So those are a couple new things that are definitely starting to come to the forefront in mathematics and statistics right now.
Sure, that is so interesting, and it's great. You know, again, the statistics and the math, it's just looking at the data, you know, looking at the evidence and really seeing what's the best way to move forward. And so both of those careers, that's kind of what you're using, and that's great. So thank you so much for joining today and speaking with us. And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Vision. We'll see you next time.